delivering the world to your doorstep. From breaking news to in-depth features, from politics to culture, from science to sports. Welcome to SNN Primetime News with
From
Kennedy
the studios
Lucas
of
Patterson.
K.L.P. Entertainment, this is SNN Primetime News.
Google U turn over long-running plan to ditch cookies. In a surprise move, Google has abandoned a plan it first announced 4 years ago to block third-party cookies from its Chrome internet browser. The UK's data privacy watchdog said it was disappointed by the decision. Cookies are small files stored on your computer which allow advertisers to track internet activity and target advertising. Google says it will instead pursue a new approach which will give users an informed choice that applies across their web browsing, and is discussing next steps with regulators. This suggests the firm is not abandoning its alternative approach to advertising, but will allow a third-party cookie-based system to operate in parallel. It ultimately means people will still see a pop-up asking them to turn cookies on or off in the future. It has been our view that blocking third-party cookies would be a positive step for consumers, said Stephen Bonner of the Information Commissioner's Office. The new plan set out by Google is a significant change, and we will reflect on this new course of action when more detail is available. Third-party cookies, small files stored on your computer by businesses other than the website you are visiting, have historically been an essential part of the way digital advertising works. They allow advertisers to track user behavior across websites, allowing them to profile consumers according to their interests. Google is a major player in online advertising, so its plan to replace cookies, dubbed Privacy Sandbox, proved controversial, with rivals and online advertising businesses arguing against the proposals. The UK competition watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, intervened in 2021, fearing the search giant's plans could cause even more advertisers to use Google's own systems. It obtained commitments from Google in 2022 designed to allay those fears. Now it is seeking reaction to the tech giant's change of plan. We will need to carefully consider Google's new approach to Privacy Sandbox, working closely with the ICO in this regard, and welcome views on Google's revised approach, including possible implications for consumers and market outcomes, it said. Jeff Green, head of advertising platform The Trade Desk, welcomed the move. I have been saying for years now to our industry, to Google, and even to Wall Street that I think it is a strategic mistake for Google to get rid of third-party cookies, he said. Google seems to finally acknowledge that the best option for them is to give consumers the choice.
Has Kamala Harris got what it takes to beat Trump? The path for Vice President Kamala Harris to secure the Democratic presidential nomination is clearing. That may end up being the easy part. The most formidable challenge, defeating Republican nominee Donald Trump in November, is still to come. Her elevation to the top of ticket would bring new strengths for the Democrats, but it also exposes weaknesses that were less of a concern with Mr. Biden. According to recent polls, Ms. Harris trails the former president slightly, a roughly similar position to the one Mr. Biden found himself in before his historic announcement. But there may be more room for those numbers to shift as we move from a hypothetical matchup to a very real one. For at least a moment, Democrats have a jolt of energy after more than 3 weeks of intense hand-wringing over the president's fitness and ability to sustain his campaign. All of Ms. Harris's leading potential rivals for the nomination have endorsed her, as has former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who remains one of the most influential players in Democratic politics. This is, still, shaping up to be a tight race in November, a condition that reflects deep partisan trenches in American politics and the distaste many voters have for Trump as a candidate. The vice president's primary challenge, and opportunity, will be to capitalize on this Trump aversion, attract centrist voters in key swing states and energize the Democratic base, which was in the past few weeks swinging towards despair, to match the enthusiasm many on the right hold for the former president. This renewed sense of Democratic presidential enthusiasm comes with a dollar sign attached. According to the Harris campaign, the vice president raised more than $80 million, £62 million, in new donations in the 24 hours since Mr. Biden's announcement, the biggest one-day total of any candidate this election cycle. That, along with the nearly $100 million she inherits from the Biden-Harris fundraising coffers, gives her a firm financial footing for the campaign to come. Ms. Harris, if she becomes the nominee, also diffuses one of the most effective attacks the Republicans have leveled against their opponent, his age. For months, the Trump campaign has been pounding Mr. Biden for being feeble and easily confused, characterizations that were reinforced for many Americans after the president's halting debate performance 4 weeks ago. The vice president, at age 59, will be a more energetic campaigner and able to make a more coherent case for her party. She could also turn the 78-year-old Trump's age against him, as he would become the oldest person ever elected president. Ms. Harris may also be able to shore up support from black voters, who polls indicate had been drifting away from Mr. Biden in recent months. If she can combine that with more backing from other minorities and younger voters, Barack Obama's winning coalition from 2008 and 2012, it could help her gain ground against Trump in the handful of swing states that will decide this year's election. Her background as a prosecutor could also burnish tough on-crime credentials. While her law enforcement resume was a liability when she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2019, and led to derisive "Kamala is a cop" attacks from the left, it could help her in a campaign against Trump. The vice president has also been the administration's point person on abortion, which has proven to be one of the most potent issues for motivating the Democratic base in recent elections. Mr. Biden, by contrast, sometimes had been a reluctant advocate on the issue, hampered by a past record of supporting some limits on the procedure. I think she reminds suburban women across the country, particularly in those battleground states, of what's at stake with reproductive rights, former New York Congressman Steve Israel, who headed the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, told the BBC's Americast podcast. "We have established a fundamental reset in the campaign. For all Harris's potential strengths, there is a reason why some Democrats were initially reluctant to push Mr. Biden to step aside, given that his running mate would be the clear successor." Despite generating Democratic enthusiasm on the subject of abortion, Ms. Harris's record as vice president has been mixed. Early in the administration, she was set the task of addressing the root causes of the migration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. A number of missteps and misstatements, including a ham-handed June 2021 interview with NBC News presenter Lester Holt, damaged her standing and opened her to conservative attacks. Republicans are already condemning her as the president's border czar, attempting to make her the face of what public opinion polls have found is the Biden administration's unpopular immigration policies. "Immigration is a soft spot for Democrats in those battleground areas," Mr. Israel said. "This is a very salient issue for voters living in those suburbs, fairly or unfairly. They believe that our immigration system is not managed strongly enough." The Trump campaign will also try to turn the vice president's prosecutorial background against her, both by highlighting the former president's record of enacting criminal justice reform and by attacking her past prosecutorial and parole decisions. Another Harris vulnerability is her checkered track record as a candidate. In her 2016 Senate bid, she faced only token opposition from Republicans in deeply Democratic California. Her one solo run for national office, a bid for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, ended in ruins. While she surged early, a combination of fumbled interviews, a lack of clearly defined vision and a poorly managed campaign led her to drop out before even the earliest primary contests. Perhaps the biggest challenge for Ms. Harris is that, unlike the president, she is not the incumbent. While she might have the opportunity to distance herself from some of the more unpopular elements of Mr. Biden's record, she also does not have the luxury of being a known quantity for voters. Expect a furious effort by Republicans to paint Ms. Harris as too untested and too risky to be president. In effect, Trump now has a greater claim to being the only proven commodity. The vice president has a chance, in the days ahead, to make a new first impression with the American public. If she stumbles out of the gate, it could open the door to an extended power struggle that stretches into the Democrats' national convention in late August. They could end up with the party uniting behind a different candidate, or tearing itself apart. As the past 4 weeks have shown, fortunes in the White House race can shift quickly and permanently. Ms. Harris has punched her ticket to the biggest stage in American politics. Now she has to show she can compete.
Musk says Tesla to use humanoid robots next year. Tesla boss Elon Musk says the electric car maker will start producing and using humanoid robots from next year. In a social media post, Mr. Musk said the robots will first be used by Tesla, which will start making them to sell in 2026. The technology billionaire had previously said he expected the robot, called Optimus, to be ready for use in Tesla factories by the end of this year. Other firms, including Honda and Boston Dynamics, have also been developing their own humanoid robots. Tesla will have genuinely useful humanoid robots in low production for Tesla internal use next year and, hopefully, high production for other companies in 2026, Mr. Musk said on his social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. It came just a day before Tesla was due to release its latest financial results. The company's shares ended Monday's trading session in New York up by more than 5%. The company has said it aims to build an autonomous humanoid robot to perform unsafe, repetitive, or boring tasks. Mr. Musk has previously said Tesla aimed for the robots to be mass-produced and cost less than $20,000, £17,900 each. He is known for setting ambitious timelines for his companies, which he has not always met. In 2019, he said he felt very confident Tesla would have self-driving taxis on the road by the following year. Earlier this year, Mr. Musk said the long-awaited robotaxi would be unveiled on August 8. Last week, he appeared to confirm a report that the event would be delayed. Mr. Musk did not give a new date but said he had requested a change to the front of the vehicle. "The extra time allows us to show off a few other things," he wrote. It came after Bloomberg News reported that the event had been delayed to October. Mr. Musk's businesses have been increasingly focusing on technologies such as artificial intelligence, autonomous driving and robots at a time of slowing demand for electric vehicles.
Louis Armstrong, the U.S. jazz icon with a controversial legacy. More than half a century after the death of Louis Armstrong, fans and critics are still arguing over his name. Is it pronounced Louis or Louis? Some point to the trumpeter's own words. In a 1947 interview, Armstrong said, "My mother always called me Louis, not Louis." But audio recordings suggest that almost everyone else who knew him, including his wife, used the other pronunciation. In some ways, this duality is appropriate, reflecting the ambiguities in Armstrong's character and persona. The journalist Murray Kempton famously summed him up as a combination of the pure and the cheap, clown and creator, god and buffoon. This month, with the release of a new album of live recordings, fresh material has been added to the ongoing debates about Armstrong's contradictions. Titled Louis in London, the record showcases both Armstrong's jazz genius and vaudevillian silliness. It also hints at the more contentious complexities of Armstrong's attitude to racism. The newly released recordings were made at the BBC in London, during Armstrong's 1968 UK tour. This period marked his peak popularity, coming just weeks after What a Wonderful World topped the UK charts. But it was also the end of his career. After the tour finished, Armstrong was struck by heart and kidney issues, from which he would never fully recover. Retreating to his New York home, an ill Armstrong began cataloging his lifetime of recordings. He became particularly enamored with the BBC recordings, playing them to visiting friends, making copies for his bandmates, and attaching a label to his personal copy that seemed to signal his intentions, for the fans. Despite Armstrong's love for these performances, they were only given a partial release after their initial broadcast. The album released this month presents a much fuller version of the BBC recordings, adding 5 new songs to those already issued. It also includes an alternative take of Hello, Dolly, which is different, longer, and better than the previous version, according to Ricky Riccardi, Director of Research Collections at the Louis Armstrong House Museum. Riccardi, who helped assemble the album, has some theories about why the BBC performances were so important to Armstrong. It's all about context, Riccardi tells the BBC. Shortly after the UK tour, his body finally gave out. So, I think there was a part of him that was coming to terms with the fact that he might never again perform on stage for his fans. In this way, Armstrong may have seen the BBC shows as his final great performances, a last hurrah, as Riccardi puts it. Even before his more serious health issues, the live concerts could be a bit erratic, Riccardi says, referring to the lip and dental problems that affected Armstrong's trumpet playing as he got older. But the London shows demonstrate that he was still capable of providing spine-tingling moments with his horn at such a late stage in life. In addition to the quality of his playing, Armstrong may have felt the BBC recordings were special for another reason. They seem to sum up his entire career, with the setlist spanning every decade of his performing life. First, there is Ole Miss, a jazz instrumental that Armstrong started playing as a teenager in the 1910s. Then there is Rockin' the Chair, a novelty song that Armstrong first recorded in 1929. Further tracks trace the remaining decades, when It's Sleepy Time Down South was first recorded in 1931, Blueberry Hill in 1949, and Mac the Knife in 1955. The set is completed with Armstrong's 1960s hits, including his signature song What a Wonderful World. But as well as providing a decade-by-decade summary of Armstrong's career, the Lewis in London album also captures his complex identity as a performer. During the UK tour, several critics remarked on the tension between Armstrong's status as a jazz pioneer and his proclivity for crowd-pleasing antics. A reviewer for Melody Maker observed, "The emphasis is heavily on singing and clowning, and lovers of the Lewis trumpet may be disappointed." A critic for The Times concurred, "As a show business performance, it was superb. From a jazz point of view it was quite undistinguished." The BBC setlist seemed to reflect this. It included some jazz instrumentals, but leaned more towards commercial fare, such as a rendition of the Bare Necessities from Disney's The Jungle Book. Riccardi argues that this had long been a feature of Armstrong's performances. It's a false narrative to say that Armstrong was an artist in the 1920s but then sold out and wasted all that promise, he says. Everything he was criticized for doing later in his career, he was already doing in the 1920s and 1930s, performing pop songs, playing Broadway show tunes, and doing broad comedy. Jazz critic and author Jordan Na Elizabeth suggests that the criticisms of Armstrong's showmanship emerged as he transitioned on to the global stage. He was subject to an intellectualization of jazz by some critics, who imposed strict parameters around what they believed constituted high art, she tells the BBC. This derived from a Eurocentric resistance to physical freedom on stage, movements of the hips, big smiles on faces.
What's the lasting effect of the outage?
And we live in an extremely interconnected world right now. Cloud devices, servers, and Crowdstrike is a popular technology. We use it as well. And so when something like this happens, there is a long tail, and has to be, it has to be cleaned up. The lessons here and the fix for the most part was fairly manual. So it took time. It wasn't a complicated fix, but it took time. And I think we're coming out of it. But there's a lot of learnings that we're also getting out of this process.
Sanjay, did you have any cause for concern ahead of this about prior updates that Crowdstrike could run? Then there might have been anything that would signal that such an event could occur.
They're a security company. You tend to trust security companies, and and so there was nothing before this specifically about CrowdStrike that would be of concern. What is always of concern when you have a larger number of patches and large number of connected systems and dependencies is your ability to really stage a patch, test it in your particular environment, because no two environments are the same. And then once you know that you've got it working where you need it, to push it out. Now, with security, the window that you have between a critical patch and your ability to deploy it is very, very small. And so you tend to trust more and push faster.
We have heard from across industries, particularly from the airline industry, the Delta CEO coming out and apologizing because still today there are issues that are affecting their ability to serve customers. Sanjay, when it comes to business continuity, what could a company like Delta have done to prevent the fallout that we now see was 3,500 plus cancellations on Saturday?
Caroline, it's about resilience, and people use the word resilience in sort of a broad way, but for us it's about a business's ability to get back to life regardless of the catastrophic event. It could have been human error, in this case possibly human error. It could be malicious. It could be internal, external malicious. It could be a natural disaster. So what we do is help our customers build a capability, build a platform, build a muscle to repeated testing and scale so that in the event that something goes sideways, you've tried and tested the ability for your business to come back to life. And I think with everything we've got going on as enterprises, not enough time is spent on practical capabilities of resilience, and more that sort of you tend to lean on the academic thought process. Yes, we've got this list, we've done this, we've written this up, but how much of your enterprise have you actually tested with a deep degree of confidence? And that's what we try to enable our customers to do.
Sanjay, I wrote in my Tech Daily column this morning about concentration risk, the idea that so many corporates and government entities relied on CrowdStrike, but also that 8.5 million computers, it was the most critical of computers that were impacted. How could have that been mitigated or prevented?
The thing about the warning shot, we've all been sort of sitting back and saying, okay, so what does my fleet look like? What do my servers look like? What are my users working with? And it always makes you take a step back and say, we need to have a very calculated mix so that you're not over-reliant or over-dependent on any one environment, because that's part of resilience. That is exactly part of resilience. And I think for everyone, this weekend's been a bit of a wake-up call to say, okay, where am I over-dependent or don't have enough controls or could be more resilient? And I think for all the negative outcome of something like this, the positive takeaway, if you can, is let's go back and make sure we're very calculated about how we build out the enterprise landscape.
A Chicago pizza expert's guide to the city's best pies. Outside Chicago, the term Chicago-style pizza is invariably associated with the deep dish pie that's often mocked by out-of-towners as lasagna in a bread bowl. But true Chicagoans know that the city and its suburbs are actually home to three iconic styles of pizza: deep dish, stuffed, and Chicago thin, aka tavern style. People think Chicago is all deep dish and was invented by the Uno's guys, says renowned local food reporter Steve Dolinsky, who published Pizza City, USA in 2018, documenting all of the region's delicious styles. But there's so much more to it. The story of Chicago pizza doesn't start with a deep dish, but with a tavern. In the 1940s, when men habitually popped into bars after work, bartenders realized that by serving a salty snack, they'd sell more beer, says Dolinsky, whose book led to a Pizza City podcast, Pizza City Tours, and the wildly popular Pizza City Fest. With the advent of gas ovens, they started making thin crust pies, which they'd cut into squares and pass around the bar on cocktail napkins for free. Then, in 1943, when Ike Sewell and Rick Ricardo opened a bar in Chicago's busy River North area, Ricardo used cake pans inherited from the bar's previous occupant to develop a deep dish pizza, leading the duo to open the pizzeria, later renamed Pizzeria Uno. Unlike its thin crust predecessor, this dough was pressed into a pan, explained Stalinsky. They topped it with cheese to protect the dough, then added toppings and a chunky tomato sauce. Fast forward to 1971 and Rocco Puglia's invention of the stuffed pizza at Nancy's, purportedly inspired by his mother's pizza rustica, Italian stuffed savory pie. All visitors and most locals still don't understand stuffed is a subcategory of deep dish, says Dolinsky. It bears little resemblance to a classic deep dish or even a deep pan pizza, due to that thin second layer of dough. Fortunately, we have so many other styles of pizza here, you don't have to rely on just one. Here are Dolinsky's favorite pizzas in Chicago. Pat's opened in 1950, bringing their spin on thin crust pizza to Chicago's North Side, where it was a smash hit. The magic here is in Pat's iconic dough, says Dolinsky, which is proofed overnight, then put through a dough sheeter used to flatten pizza dough into large sheets, which helps to make a really thin crust. The skins are then cured in a cooler for about 3 days. After the dough is sheeted, it's laid between sheets of paper and put on a rack to let it really dry out, explains Dolinsky. The result is one of the thinnest pizza crusts in Chicago, which is topped from edge to edge with sauce, cheese, and crumbled fennel sausage before it's baked to a crisp. Dolinsky likens it to eating a salty cracker dipped in tomato sauce. This family business originated in 1923 as a tavern on the south side of Chicago. In 1946, they became one of the city's first thin crust pizza makers. This pizza starts with a thin layer of tomato sauce topped with pinched and pressed raw bulk Italian sausage, which renders delicious fat into the pie as it's baked, says Dolinsky. The cracker-thin pizza is finished with handfuls of whole milk mozzarella. Due to baking directly on the hot stone deck of the oven, the bottom, or undercarriage, has blistered, charred spots that add to the texture. It's cut into squares, and whether you go for the crackly edges or cheesier middle is up to you. Nick Baracco, the founder, declared in 1965 that they would never deliver their pizza, which is honored to this day, as is the pizza's original recipe. Jason Vincent is the James Beard Award-winning chef and owner of Giant and Chef's Special Cocktail Bar. During the pandemic, he started making pizza from a portable truck, and in 2023 he opened Pizza Matta next door to Giant. When Vincent first opened Pizza Matta, he was serving East Coast-style pizza by the wedge-shaped slice. Once he perfected that pie, he added a tavern-style pizza as a weekly special. Because it was so successful, it's now on the regular menu and customers can get both styles every day. Vincent's pies are perfectly thin and crispy, and being the accomplished chef that Vincent is, he finishes his pizza with Sarvecchio, a dry, shredded, salty and nutty cheese from Wisconsin that resembles Parmesan in flavor, says Dolinsky. Vincent also uses sausage, ham and chicken from a farm in Michigan, premium pepperoni from Ohio, and mushrooms cultivated in Chicago. This famed spot was founded in 1971 by Larry Aronson and is now run by his son, Rich. Larry opened my pie because he loved Uno and its sister pizzeria, tinkering with the pie to make his own version. What makes my pie so special? It's known for the secret spice mix, which Larry makes at home and gives to Rich to add to the tomato sauce, says Dolinsky. No one knows the recipe but Larry, who put the mysterious formula in his will so that Rich can one day make the mix. While most pies get a ton of flavor from the rendered sausage, says Dolinsky, this one is great for vegetarians because the spices add that flavor. This is a one-hand pie, firm, no flopping, with a crisp tender dough. It earns Dolinsky's stamp of OBR, optimal bite ratio, meaning every bite has the perfect mix of crust, cheese, sauce, and topping. In 2014, pizza in Chicago took a new course when Rich Labriola, a former commercial baker, opened Labriola just off Michigan Avenue. Labriola ferments his dough for 2 to 3 days. This allows the yeast to eat the sugar to develop carbon dioxide during the ferment, which gives the dough some lift and airiness, says Dolinsky, explaining that this helps the dough maintain shape during baking. There's a nice Midwestern spin here with nods to corn. Labriola incorporates corn oil in the dough and then lines the bottom of the pan with coarse cornmeal to provide some texture underneath, but also to help release the pizzas when they're finished baking. Much like in Detroit, which has its own style of pizza, the cheese is spread to the very edge of the pie, so as it bakes, the cheese seeps down between the dough and the pan and burns a little, getting super crunchy like a fricco, a crispy Italian cheese cracker. This is a thicker pizza that definitely demands to be eaten with a knife and fork.
Delivering the world to your doorstep. From breaking news to in-depth features, from politics to culture, from science to sports. Welcome to SNN Primetime News with Kennedy Lucas Patterson.